Reviewed them once and I'll review them again. It's time for Rule of 3 follow-ups, where the projects I found interesting before get a second look. I'm back at it again with another follow-up special, this time discussing the second story arc in IDW's Sonic the Hedgehog comic. Last time I gave it a look, I finished up the first storyline and found it to be a well-written, digestible, and visually pleasing series, with some minor criticisms regarding choice of dialogue and the series' original characters, among other things. Before we begin, I'd also like to state for transparency that the second storyline is around the time a person I have contact with began to work on the comic, so bear that in mind while listening to this review. Will I find the Metal Virus arc as good as the first? Let's get into it. Quickly, I'll just start off with the Annuals and the Tangle and Whisper miniseries. The Annuals I thought were a fun collection of stories, although the short length meant that Jewel didn't get much of an introduction since there's only so much story you can tell in 13 pages. The Team Sonic Racing preview from the 2019 Annual felt more like an instruction manual than a story, and I did kinda raise an eyebrow at Rouge not knowing about any treasure laying around the pyramid after she'd been there in Sonic Adventure 2, but the Victory Garden story with Blaze and Silver felt nice and homely, and in the 2020 Annual I quite liked Big's bittersweet story and the one about Night the Owl showing that even a normal, regular guy like him can make a difference. The Tangle and Whisper comic featured what I thought was a pretty great story with a strong villain in Mimic. I really liked how we learned more about Whisper and saw her struggle with how she had to carry the weight of what happened to her friends and Mimic using it against her. Legit good stuff. When it comes to the Annuals, miniseries, and the comic in general, the art came from a variety of people and the results range from excellent to kinda funky but nothing bad. The facial expressions still get to top-notch levels, which I love, but the action can be hit or miss. Sometimes I felt like something happened between 3 panels, but I couldn't tell how the middle one was trying to show it, for instance, which made it a bit hard to follow. Gotta say, I thought the crayon map they started showing at the beginning of issues was a nice additional piece to show the emotional depth this storyline had. In terms of character design, I think Jewel's got one of the best ones of the comic exclusive characters, and Mimic had an interesting design for a Mobian octopus. As far as characterization goes, I quite like Jewel despite the shortened introduction. She's not an action hero, but she doesn't have to be, just wanting to take care of the Mineral Museum and being a worrywart. Can relate. She's also level-headed and supportive. Who could hate that? I'm also grateful that they expanded on Whisper and let her actually contribute this time around. They did some really interesting stuff with her here. As much as I liked Shadow in his debut, I felt he kinda faltered at the end of the first arc, and it only gets worse here. But I'm not gonna hold it against the comic so much as against Sega, who basically handcuffed the writers into giving him the shitty edgelord type personality he had in his self-titled game for reasons I'll never understand. I still think Tangle's annoying and doesn't actually do much. Every time she gets up to her antics, it just comes across to me as the writers begging, "Please like Tangle, please like Tangle." However, I can appreciate that she at least has the capacity to listen every once in a while and gives Whisper a reason to trust in other people. Metal Sonic felt pretty in and out. He straight up disappears for a while, which affirms the feelings I had about him at the end of the first arc. If you had to use him here, it could have waited until the middle or the end as some kind of contingency plan of Eggman's or something. One surprising element was just how good Cream's character arc was here, wanting to be brave in the face of danger despite the loss of her mother and both Chow to the Metal Virus, along with her moments with Gemerald. It was really fantastic stuff and dare I say the best thing about the entire storyline. Amy was pretty well written right up until the last 2 issues where it takes an egregious turn for reasons I'll get into later. Then to round off the characterization, I was absolutely down for how ruthlessly Eggman was depicted here. There were moments I legit went, "Oh, you bastard," out loud because of it. He was a really entertaining villain. And so, the plot. At first I wondered why Eggman was jumping back into action so quickly, but after seeing how he was being written, I thought it made sense. He must have felt cooped up, and I like how his rushing through everything eventually bites him in the ass. On that note, Dr. Starline's views on Eggman changing over the course of the story I thought was an interesting angle, placed to that old adage about meeting your idols. That being said, his plan to involve the Deadly Six blowing up in his face the way it did makes him look no better than Eggman, when they could have instead had him pull a straight-up mutiny to hammer in the idea that he might be more competent. Rouge working with Orbot and Cubot behind the scenes against the Deadly Six was great though, so at least there's that. I liked Sonic's struggle with intrusive thoughts that he might be letting his friends down, especially as more become infected with the virus, even if his inner monologues start veering into that Super Friends type scriptwriting that Blaze had in the last arc. One thing about Sonic I thought was kinda weird was how he decided to jeopardize the mission by getting up his own asshole about Metal Sonic going back to Eggman. Like, my dude, there is a time and a place. And yeah, it's not like Sonic hasn't gone into certain other situations without thinking it through first, but never during the part where shit hits the fan and things get serious. I liked the emotion put into the story, with each loss feeling impactful, but I do have to question the Restoration's lack of safety protocols that allowed the outbreak at the HQ to happen. They didn't think to scan the refugees before stuffing them all in there? Sure, it was a high-stress situation for our heroes, but I think it might have played out better if Eggman had found the base and let one of the critters he infected earlier loose inside. The action was a mixed bag in that it seemed like a bit of a stretch that SPO and the Babylon Rogues won their fights despite clearly being done for, but on the other hand, Cream in general against Xena was very well done with a beautiful payoff at the end, as was the finale with Sonic and Silver taking out Zavok and the Metal Virus as a whole with their super forms. I was liking how the story played out up until the last two issues, which felt weak to me. The post-fight action all came across as really unnecessary, with our heroes being given basically no time to soak in the victory or clean up, with Eggman's plan coming off as petty. Then we have Sonic's amnesia in the Soul Dimension being solved as soon as it became a problem, and finally the way that Amy hands off leadership of the Restoration to Jewel. They play it at first like Jewel's gonna handle all the paperwork while Amy remains a commander in battle, but then Eggman attacks and Amy just throws Jewel, who is a very anxious person and not really qualified yet to be leading in a battle position, under the bus when asked for orders, leaving Vector and Tails to pick up the pieces, which unintentionally justifies Amy's concerns that she's not a real leader. I think all of the stuff they put forth here could have served as another story arc, or at least a miniseries, with Eggman wreaking havoc with Omega's new body, Sonic out of the picture going on adventures in the Soul Dimension before eventually meeting up with Blaze, and Amy regaining her confidence as a leader and settling into her place on the front lines. It gives me the same vibes that Eggman's return to evil and Metal Sonic getting fixed right back up at the end of the first arc did, and I'm starting to wonder if the people behind the comic are afraid of taking a chance by changing the status quo long term. Aside from that, there's just a couple nitpicks about the references being more phoned in than they were last time, overuse of the phrase "look where that got you," weird grammatical mistakes still popping up from time to time, Knuckles knowing what the Restoration is despite having been in isolation, and Sonic making a big deal about touching the grass on Angel Island when they land there, but then just doing it anyway. Inconsistencies, but nothing that really breaks the story in any way. Oh, right, well, that sure was a lot. Am I continuing? Despite the sour notes left by its ending, I liked the Metal Virus story up to that point and will continue reading in the hopes that the comic's potential can be reached. They've got the pieces there, it's just a bit disappointing to get my hopes up and then have something bog it down a bit right at the end. Plus I have to continue reading anyway for the Amy Rose character analysis video I'm doing later this year. I'll see you next time for the second half of this two-parter by having a look at IDW Sonic's third storyline. Until then, I have been Skull902, thank you for watching and have yourselves a wonderful day.